Hi, Rebecca. Welcome. Doing all right. You're on mute right now.
Did you have a nice vacation?
I did. It was very good to get away and out in nature.
Good, I'm glad. I'm so glad you had that chance.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh. You deserved it.
Thank you.
Greg, do we have a lot of public comments tonight?
We have 4 requests tonight.
Okay, good enough.
Hi, I'm probably going to be quiet and video less until it's closer to the bond presentation.
That is fine, Shannon. You can do that. How did you manage to get Karina's name on there?
It's probably because she got the invite forwarded from Karina. That's usually how that shows up that way.
I did send one to you, Shannon, but I guess it didn't come through, huh?
I don't think so, but we can fix it fairly
There we
soon.
go. Nicely done.
Do you want me to put an official title on it? Company
I think
name?
it's fine.
My
And
nickname?
yes, you can feel free to stay muted and off video if you want until it's your time.
I will.
Is there a Zoom filter that's putting a bow tie on our superintendent? That's fascinating. Really advanced Zoom filter.
There are some things that right before you become an adult, we'll teach you how to do. So we'll get the bow tie next.
Bow ties are cool, to quote a favorite show of mine.
Good evening, everyone. Let's see, I think 1, 2, 3, 4. We're missing Brian, but it is 7 o'clock. So let's get started. Bang the gavel to start the meeting. Welcome, everybody. It looks like we still have about 23 people as attendees tonight, which is great. We love that public participation is up so high lately, especially during this time.
Hey, Greg, can you hear me?
COVID. Yeah, we can hear you, Dave.
Yes.
And there's Brian. Okay, so let's just review the agenda. We have we'll have public comment, and I believe we have just a few this evening. Looks like 4. After public comment, we'll move into board comments, superintendent comments, take a look at our consent agenda. And then we've got quite a bit of new business tonight. We've got the communicable disease plan, our discussion around possible calendar changes, the plans around reopening, the discussion of the bond, and the forming of the ad hoc committees. So it's a busy night, but I'm excited you're all here. So let's go ahead and get started with our public comments. So for those who have signed up for public comments tonight, we generally recently have only been allowing for 3 minutes, but tonight, since we only have 4, we can go ahead and allow for 5 minutes if you'd like to take up more time. Feel free. Just a reminder, please do not discuss staff personnel issues or characters of board members. Please keep it to board business and hopefully things that are relevant to the agenda tonight. So let's get started. Let's start with Stacy. After Stacy, we will have Amy. Hi, Stacy.
There.
Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. My name is Stacy Gott. I am a school psychologist and have been in the Newburgh Public Schools parent for 14 years. I'm speaking to you to talk about racism and its impact on mental health for our students. Study after study has demonstrated the negative outcomes of racism for both physical and mental health for Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color. The reverse is also true, that positive non-discriminatory settings result in positive outcomes. We know that stress, adversity, and trauma can impact concentration and attention, cognitive functioning, memory, and social emotional regulation, in turn resulting in negative outcomes for mental and physical health, learning, and relationships. But in all of our conversations in the school setting around trauma and its impact, little mention is made of trauma related to racism. We tend to think of trauma that happens through interpersonal interactions, such as abuse, neglect, and bullying. But we often put too little emphasis on societal trauma caused by racism embedded in our policies and practices. We must also consider the impact of community, historical, and generational trauma on our students. Students that come through the doors often carry a lot of rocks in their backpacks. And for Black students, Indigenous students, and students of color, we sadly add rocks to their heavy burden due to systemic racism and implicit biases. So what can we do to lessen the loads of our students already have to carry? Author and historian Ibram X. Kendi has redefined the term microaggression to be racist abuse, as there's nothing micro about actions that cause stress, anxiety, depression, and pain. We need to have staff education and training on the meaning of microaggression, what does it look like, and how do we respond to it? We need to make sure that we have intentional, frequent conversations about racism, not just an occasional training. We need professional development for all staff on implicit biases. The research suggests that even being aware of one's own implicit bias can counteract its influence. Implicit biases operates below conscious awareness and is not deliberate or intentional, yet implicit bias can result in harmful racist actions. The good news is that it can be reprogrammed. We need regular cultural competency training, intentionality in our hiring practices, and regular reviewing of disproportionality data and policy in regards to discipline, special education, and the gifted and talented programs. We must look at our discipline data and processes and see how restorative justice methods can help improve outcomes. All of these things can help remove some of those rocks our students are carrying in their packs. The anti-racist resolution leads us a step in the right direction, but this will require a concerted effort and introspection, and it asks each one of us to lower our defenses, to hold ourselves accountable for our own learning, actions, and decisions. I encourage the board to consider this statement when creating policies and making decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Ron, are you in a position to do the 1 minute, 30-second signs again? You're muted still.
Yeah, my sheets are downstairs. I forgot to bring them. I'll make new ones real quick.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so next up we have Amy, and after Amy, we will have Jared. Hi,
Thank
Amy.
you.
Yeah, go ahead,
Hi,
just a
thank
second.
you.
Just 1 second, let's get the signs ready. Sorry about that.
Signs are ready.
Signs are ready, okay. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Amy Stevens, and I'm a parent and community member here in Newburgh. I've been a community member for the past 20 years. And I'd like to start by thanking you for your commitment to the passage of the resolution committing to be an anti-racist school district. The resolution stating specifically anti-racist explains that we are ever striving while honoring the emotional, intellectual, and social investment of our students, teachers, and community. The work is worth it, and we are plainly describing that the ongoing critical thinking invested in an anti-racist school district as being a verb or as an action. Being a mom of both Black and white children, my experiences show me the struggle that my children experience, as well as the connections their white friends choose to make with them. To clarify, an anti-racist resolution provides a safe learning environment for everyone of all races. I see white children see the disparity, and I see the struggles some take on their own. My hope is to see in an anti-racist resolution and policies to hold this work up together. Given the recognition of our work is actionable and essential, especially given the structurally embedded nature of racism, we require a framework to do this work, just as we provide physical safety and understanding of what maintains physical safety in a school. We do the same for intellectual safety in examining the intellectual and emotional safety through structure or framework. I'm looking forward to the growth from the resolution to being an anti-racist school towards developing a framework or policies necessary to productively make small steps of success that we may be able to mark and celebrate through measurable data-driven decisions. This framework will also highly support parents and our community with clarity and assurance of a safe learning environment. One example of this is quickly demonstrated by how one of our neighboring school districts reaffirmed safety and clarity last week in a response to an occurrence within their community. Here's their board's response. Yesterday, we learned of an anonymous letter received by a Lake Oswego family signed "Your Neighbors." The letter requested the removal of a sign in the window painted by an LOSD student supporting racial justice and Black Lives Matter. As a school board and district, we reaffirm our commitment to creating environments of anti-racism and belonging within systems that are inclusive of everyone in our community. The Lake Oswego School District is committed to act in a socially responsible manner that models the valuing of every human being. We support the rich and growing diversity in Lake Oswego and believe that all in our city should feel safe and valued. I deeply appreciate the leadership being provided through the entire Newburgh School Board. Thank you for your commitment to our students and our community and your work in establishing structures that benefit our community in years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. Next we have Jared, and after Jared, we will have Jessica. Jared, are you there? Maybe Greg, would it be possible to come? Oh wait, he's unmuting.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Jared. Go ahead.
Thank you for giving me some time this evening. My name is Jared Jones. I am the father of a 2020 graduate, a rising 10th grader, and a rising 7th grader. I heard one board member in the previous meeting refer to anti-racism as an ideology. Of course, it is an ideology, defined as a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. Democracy is a political ideology, and so is fascism. Capitalism is an economic ideology, and so is communism, and so is socialism. Each ideology carries benefits and dangers. The choice is not whether or not to have an ideology, but which one to espouse. To reject anti-racism because it is an ideology is to embrace another ideology. We can disagree about what our ideology is, but let's not pretend we can do the business of a school district without any. As much as these semantics interest me, I believe that the work of a school board is to do whatever it must to ensure that every student, regardless of background, has a series of excellent and supportive educational experiences that last as long as they are enrolled. They are all our kids, and they all deserve our disciplined, focused efforts to help their minds and bodies grow. For that reason, I am here to urge you, our board members, to move forward on policies that will change the actual experience of students of color in our Newburgh schools. It is one thing to affirm that Black Lives Matter or to state an opposition to racism. It is another to seek out parts of our system that cause harm in ways that are often hidden, inadvertent, not the fault of any individual human being, but still happening predictably to students who are not white, English-speaking, cisgendered, straight, and middle class. That takes focus, insight, and intention. That is what the community has elected you to do. Specifically, I am here tonight to ask you to do three things. First, please continue the review of all NSD policies and procedures to root out inequities. Make that a high priority. Second, please create an ad hoc committee on equity and anti-racism and include students of color among its members. And third, please guide teaching staff to include a complete multicultural curriculum that tells the whole truth about history, literature, and the society that we steward together. Please help us live up to our shared ideology of democracy, the ideology that we, the people, the demos, are best when we actively include every voice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for joining us tonight. Okay, and last we have Jessica. Hi, Jessica. Go
Hi.
ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. Respected City Council people, my name is Jessica Baker. I'm a former teacher and a parent of children in the Newburgh Public School District. First, I would like to say thank you. Thank you to those who voted to pass the anti-racism resolution. Thank you so much for taking a stand against racism in our school community. I did want to say that the idea of changing the name of the anti-racism policy doesn't make sense to me. If the point is that we need to be actively working to dismantle inequalities based on systemic racism in our schools, then changing the name to remove anti-racism softens our stance against racism. And I really hope the board does not condone softening our district's stance against racism. Secondly, I strongly believe our children need more inclusive curriculum across content areas around history, race, and racism. I know that as educators, especially as predominantly white educators, the subject of race and our history with it is hard and anxiety producing, but it is so important that our kids are part of the conversation about race and racism. They see it. Children are not blind to color. White kids see the educational and disciplinary disparities that affect kids of color. Kids also notice who works in the cafeteria and who the teachers and principals are. From the time children are born, they're taking in stimuli and they're categorizing it. When we are so uncomfortable talking about race with our children and how our racist past influences the racial disparities of our present, they don't just ignore those differences. If we don't talk about those differences and why they are there, kids will make up their own reasons for why there are no Black teachers in the school or why the heroes of their literature or science curriculum are predominantly white. They will create their own schema, and those schema are often the simplest explanations and are often the most damaging. Not talking about it is not working. If we truly believe that the purpose of teaching history is so that the past does not repeat itself, we cannot just pick and choose what history we teach. We need to teach all of it across curriculum and start teaching it with the youngest of them. White kids should not be allowed to get out of the conversation because talking about racial disparities is uncomfortable and scary. Kids of color have to deal with that every day. The ability to ignore racism is itself a white privilege. I am currently reading a wonderful book called Raising White Children in a Racially Unjust America by Jennifer Harvey. I really recommend this book to anyone wondering about how to talk to kids about race and racism. It is well written, accessible, and full of great ideas and starting points. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you for the suggestion on the reading as well. Okay. Wow, it feels kind of crazy to have a meeting in which we don't have a lot of public comment. So that's a good thing. Okay, let's move on to board comments. I'll go ahead and open it up for any board members who have comments this evening.
Yeah, Brandy, I'll go.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
I'll say it every single time we have a board meeting. I appreciate everybody calling in, and everybody has heartfelt things to say. And I don't think anybody out there that I've talked to in our community has a problem with racism or a problem fighting racism. Sorry, I said that incorrectly. But I do think we have an issue that I'd like to challenge everybody on too, is what I've experienced in the last couple months has been opposite of what I hear in some of these themes about how we should treat other people. And on such a big issue, I think we have a lot to listen to on both sides. I try to listen to everybody that calls in. I try to listen to what you say. If you suggest a book, I try to pick up on that and look at it. I'm open to new ideas. I'm open to what everybody has to come up with. I don't think we're doing that both ways. And I think everybody's got to sit back and listen to both sides of this, because there's still many people that I speak to out in the community who would not agree with some of the statements made. And see people say, well, why don't they call in to the school board meetings? Why don't they go on and say this stuff? So many people, just like you talk about at school, we talk about this fear. People have a fear in their own neighborhood, in their own jobs, their own businesses, especially in Newburgh, where if they do make a comment, they feel like they're going to get attacked. And I think until we get past that point where we can sit down as adults and talk about this in a way where we don't walk away arguing, and that we can listen to each other, we don't have to come to an agreement, then how are we ever going to teach this to our kids? And to think that we can do that is foolish. I agree, there needs to be give and take on both sides. But right now, we're at a spot in our society where the listening is very thin. And until we get to that point, how do we really look at our kids and say, this is the correct way to go? And there's a lot of things we can do for sure right off the bat. But until we can sit down and be very, very, very civil with people and not talk behind their back and not confront people and just not be attacked. And I think that's a challenge that the school board has to take on right now, is how do we get to that point where we can just sit back and civilly talk about these conversations about something that's the biggest topic that we've ever dealt with in my time on the school board, racism. It's a big issue, and it's something we have to do better at, and it's something we have to be strong with, but it's not something we can just fly over very quickly on this and just be passing stuff left and right, when we have to represent the entire community of Newburgh. The entire community of Newburgh and Dundee needs to be represented. And if we have these conversations, and maybe people on both sides will understand a little bit what the person on the other side is trying to say. And I think until we get to that point, we're in a real dangerous spot if we're going to come off this thing and go straight to talking to our kids about it. Books are dangerous. We can read books on the right or the left or whatever, and we can come to conclusions on those based on what a theory is. But I think we really need to be solid in this. I think that's why these discussions have to be deep and long on the school board. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Any other board comments this evening?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I wasn't able to make it to the last meeting, but at the last meeting we discussed, and we'll be discussing more, our reopening plan. And, originally we were going to go to a hybrid, and now it looks like things have changed yet again. And following COVID-19, we're going to go to the total distance learning to begin with. I would imagine folks are, just like my family, pretty apprehensive about that, and how that's going to work for their families, their kids. In no world before March 13th would I have said the best thing for me and my family is for my girls not to be in school. But I have to admit, I kind of breathed a sigh of relief when we decided to go to, or when we were directed, and we went with total distance learning, because I want my kids to be safe and I want them to get a good education. And right now, we've got a lot of folks working really hard to make sure that those two criteria happen. And I just want to thank the teachers, administrators that are working on that, and also say that I understand the apprehensions that folks have. This is going to be a big impact on, my having to take time off of work to help care for my kids. It's going to be a big impact on, my girls' social development. The biggest question my family has is probably similar to a lot of folks, is what are extracurricular activities going to look like? What are the electives going to look like? Because those are often the things that hook families in, hook a student in who might not be engaged academically. And it's going to be tough. We're all going to have to work on this and help each other through it. So I just want to thank the folks who are working on it and encourage everybody to help those around you get through this challenging time.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I agree. I want to thank not just the district staff, but also our building administrators and our teachers and our staff who are working clearly very diligently on trying to not only get a continued distance learning model going that is going to be robust academically, but that also supports our students socially, emotionally. And in reviewing our board packet tonight and seeing the reopening plans for each individual building, you can see how much time and effort has gone into the details of what potentially a hybrid model will look like when we get to that point. And it's just a reminder that there's a lot of people working very hard right now for our kids, and I want to say thank you. Are there any other board comments? Okay, let's move on to superintendent comments. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Brandy. Well, you actually, both of you, the last two of you, took the words out of my mouth. I had something very simple for tonight. I do really want to thank all the folks who've been working on these plans. It's interesting when we put plans together and then we switch gears, and some people have mentioned they thought it was, it'll be an easy kind of transition, but we've had to essentially remake plans nearly from scratch. Even though we've been working on some things in parallel, the level of detail is pretty amazing. So I wanted to specifically thank our DO leadership and all the staff here in the building who are working like crazy. Many of them have had only a few days off to try to recharge. Our building administrators have been working all the time in groups and individually and with their teams. And then we've had lots of faculty and lots of staff who have been part of the development of those, reviewing curriculum, doing all those things that happen normally during a school year. So a lot of people have been working very hard this summer. So I just wanted to thank everybody on my team and across the whole district, because I know it's an incredible lift due to this. The changes that we'll talk about here in a little bit, we just got today at 1 p.m. So there are lots of things that we had to make adjustments to from the Department of Ed that came out at 1 in the afternoon, and we had folks get right on it and make those changes so we would have them available. So I apologize for getting them and having a later packet come in, but we wanted to make sure we had the best information possible. So thank you to all of our staff members across the system who've been really working hard to get this as best we can for opening school. So that's what I have for you.
Great, thanks. And I know we'll hear from you quite a bit later on in the agenda. So.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let's move on to consent agenda. I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, with a motion and second, is there discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. And all those opposed? Dave, are you abstaining? Dave, can you hear me? Oh. I'm sorry, it's not clear if you're abstaining or voting yes or no.
Abstaining.
Abstaining, okay. So passes 6-1 with 1 abstention. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our new business. I'll turn it back over to Joe.
Hang on, Brandy. 6-1, was there a vote against? I didn't see a vote against.
I'm sorry, it was 6-1, Dave abstained.
So 6-0 with an abstention.
0 with an abstention, thank you. Yes. Okay, let's move on to Joe with our communicable disease plan. I'm sorry, I feel like with a bow tie, I need to call you Dr. Morlock. So Dr. Morlock.
It's all a ploy to get you to call me Dr. Morlock. No, I just thought it would be a nice change. All right, well, thank you. We discussed the communicable disease plan last time. There were some questions around the thermometer usage, and so I wanted to kind of go over that because the question that came forward from the board was about the use of thermometer doing temperature checks as a way for exclusion of students who may be exhibiting a high temperature when they come in the building. So I wanted to go over some of the criteria for exclusion, talking about the recommendations from the Department of Ed and the CDC. And so that would talk about that specific portion of it because we did discuss the rest. So the Oregon Health Authority indicates the following as the criteria for exclusion. It must be a temperature by mouth greater than 100.4 degrees. Use of a thermometer that measures a body temperature as opposed to skin temperature is required to ensure accuracy. And when contacted, our district nurse also, she reiterated this requirement, citing the inaccuracies of touch or infrared thermometers that measure skin temperature. So that's one of them. Also, the Department of Education doesn't recommend the use of skin or infrared to exclude students from the educational setting, specifically because due to issues of accuracy and logistical. They are not restricted or prohibited. They're just not included in any of the documentation. And they continue not. I actually asked that question today during our 1 p.m. meeting where we reviewed the latest blueprint changes. The CDC also does not currently recommend use of universal screenings, like for screenings of students all through grades 12 to be conducted by schools. Parents and caregivers should be strongly encouraged to monitor their children for signs of infectious illness every day. If we want to implement a universal thermometer screening protocol, here are the steps according to the CDC that we would be using. First of all, there's a physical barrier screening. So we would be standing behind a physical barrier, such as glass or plastic window, partition, things like that, that can serve to protect the staff member's face and mucous membranes from respiratory droplets. We would make a visual inspection of the child for signs of illness, which could include flushed cheeks, rapid breathing, difficulty breathing, fatigue, or extreme fussiness. We would then conduct the temperature screening. So first we do hand hygiene, wash hands with soap and water for 20 seconds. If those are not available, they have to use a hand sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol. Put on disposable gloves, check the child's temperature, reaching around the partition or through the window. The face needs to stay behind the barrier at all times during the screening. And then if performing a temperature check on multiple individuals, they must use a clean pair of gloves for each child, and the thermometer must be thoroughly cleaned between each check. So that is the only way that we could exclude students by using temperature checks. I know that there are also some information around some PPE screening. ACLU has a white paper out there about multiple concerns with universal screening. I know that that's come up some places. So to answer the question from last time, it's not recommended. It hasn't been put into any of the guidance. And if we're going to use it for exclusion, it will have to be a body temperature. So it would have to be essentially temperature by mouth for us to be able to exclude students based on their temperature. So I wanted to get that out, and then I want to check in with Karen Pugsley, who spent a bunch of time working with Anne to see if I've missed anything over the conversations we had about this earlier.
No, I think you got all of the pieces that were part of it. It's there's a lot of kind of emerging information across the world, really, and the World Health Organization also has multiple criteria for it as well. So yeah, there's lots of information about the thermometer checks.
I have a question. Early in that report from what you heard from the state, you mentioned that they don't encourage universal screening. That's the way I think I heard you say it, which would sound to me like maybe they don't even want us to visually screen for symptoms. Can you clarify that?
Karen, did you want to speak to the visual
Sure.
screenings?
Sure. So basically, it's not just universal screening. It's universal screening with the thermometers process. That's the only thing that they don't recommend. And the ODE does recommend visual screening. It's in the documentation from them as one way to ensure that at least we have adult eyes on kids coming in the school.
Well, and we talked about this before. And maybe you guys have some information to know why we should be willing to rely on visual screening for kids who may have just run to get to the line and maybe flush for those reasons and breathing hard for those reasons, or just have a regular asthma issue going on. And why that? So I'm a little bit at a loss. Why would we do those even less reliable methods, and not maybe use the skin touch screening to do initial evaluation and then use the more intrusive thermometer? Why is that? I guess I don't understand why that's the way we need to go. I think it's a valid question because I think parents are going to have this kind of question as to whether their kids are being properly protected or properly included if they're sent home because they happen to have run to get in line or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think that your question really is connected to what does a visual screen do in order for us to make sure that students are safe. And I would say that a visual screen alone would not be appropriate. I think that what that does is it helps us in a quick process to see if there's any kind of a symptom that we can observe, and that we would then have that student go to the sick room into further identification of any kind of possibility of infection. And that includes talking with adults at home. It's just like anything else. When you're a building principal, your sick room, you have people who are trained to be able to ascertain whether or not a student can be in the school. And there are multiple criteria.
If you took them to the sick room, would they then have their temperature taken, and that would not count as universal because you were being selective?
Correct. You're being selective.
And then we'd be using this protocol as mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. The protocol is easier to, well, it's not easier. It's basically more appropriate to process on a more selective process than it would be for universal. And, and just in terms, I'm just going to tell you that, as a building administrator, when I first started thinking about how could we possibly do a universal screening for thermometers, even if they're infrared or if they're touch, I just want you to think about what my mind went to, which is 350 kids coming into a middle school in probably 2 to 3 entrances. And the possibility is pretty amazing in terms of time and in terms of the process of making sure students are safe as they enter the school. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just logistics, it's safety.
Are there any other questions for Karen or Dr. Morlock?
Yeah, I have a few questions. Would a face shield meet the requirements of a physical barrier under the requirements you laid out? Second, there would be nothing that would prevent us from using a skin temperature reading as a selection method to figure out who should then take a body temperature reading to see if they should be excluded. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Those are my 2 questions.
So I can't answer the face shield. The CDC says you may use a face shield if you do not have a barrier with a mask. They do not recommend it because it's not as protective. That's the only thing that they put in the guidance, was that it's the second option. The first option is a physical barrier. Second option is a face shield and a mask.
And a face shield and mask is what our teachers will have with them in the classroom, correct?
I believe that they will have access to PPE, yes.
And Brian, what was it? Remind me of your second question.
The second question is that there's nothing in the you need a body temperature to exclude them that would prevent us from using a skin temperature reading to select the kids who then should go to the school nurse and take a body temperature reading. Is that correct?
There is nothing that excludes that, no.
Thank you.
Rebecca, you're still muted. There you go.
What is the logistics, and does Annie Berger, our district nurse, what is her feelings on the scanning temperatures as entrance to the building?
So I talked with Annie for an extended period of time about the Oregon Health Authority guidance, as well as her own opinions as our district nurse. Annie is very clear that she does not recommend screening temperatures, skin temperature at building entrances because of the safety concerns, as well as the inaccuracy of the results. And so she considers it not to be effective, and so therefore not useful. That's her as a nurse, that's her perspective. And in terms of the logistics, I would just say that if you start really looking at the amount of time, for example, literally cleaning materials, making sure that you have enough personnel at each of the entrances to do it, changing gloves between every student, that is a tremendous amount of logistical firepower to try to work through in a way that doesn't negatively impact instructional time. One of the reasons we designed the learning systems in place in terms of just the schedules with lunch, with a hybrid lunch as a grab and go, is because we were really trying to maintain our instructional hours and making sure that students were safe. And for us to actually serve lunch at the secondary level would have taken literally, in small cohorts, would have taken, you know, one and a half hours to do that, which we would rather have them in classrooms.
Just to clarify, the requirement to change gloves between each screening, was that a requirement of the Oregon Health Authority, or was that guidance from the CDC?
That was from the CDC.
So that's non-binding guidance.
It's a CDC guidance.
To change gloves between each person that you were doing a body temperature check.
Yes. Well, any kind of a temperature check, actually.
Right.
If you're within 6 feet of a student, which would be required for you to do this, then it would be, you know, that's why the glove changing is important.
I think what strikes me is the disparity between this is so dangerous that we need the people taking the kids' temperatures in a bubble and to change gloves between each reading, and then we can safely put kids in our classrooms. And that there's some gap there that I'm not getting.
Right.
Well, I think that's why we're not right now.
Right, we're not putting kids in classrooms now, and that's, you know, I think that some of that's exceptionally important to remember, is that we're making choices based on, of course, metrics, which we can talk about as well if you'd like to know the numbers on those, as well as the safety, and that's part of the decision making around what we can do to safely open schools or not. Other states are doing it, and I think the results have been pretty clear with early results, and I think those will continue to not go exceptionally well. I think we saw if you saw the video from the place in Georgia, and they're already starting to see their cases go. So that's why we're not starting in person, and we don't know when we'll start. We're not setting a date out there to say, you know, we're planning on November or January or April, because I don't think we'll have that information until we have far more stuff taken care of, and that's what's gone into making a decision about, you know, not being in person for school. So all of this would be, you know, sometime in the future, but, you know, just keeping if I think about just a logistics, an easy one, you know, if we only have 100 kids and they're coming in a door or two, just when one door and one line, 100 kids would be 2 football fields long, 6 feet apart, that we would have to be managing as we brought them in individually. So I think there's a pretty large logistical challenge just in the number of kids. And again, I don't think we'd even be getting to that point because we're not coming back into the building with students in classrooms right now. So I think that that's it's a very important thing to remember. That's why we're taking these precautions. We know how hard it is on families. We know how hard it is on teachers. We know how hard it is on kids to not come into school. But we're making a decision to not bring them into school, to not create more harm. And that's why we're doing it this way.
Hey, Dr. Joe?
Yep.
How does that with extracurricular activities, especially athletics and things like that in the fall? We're not going to have kids back in school, so are they going to be not participating at all until we go back to school? Is that kind of the...
Can I just interrupt really quick? Sorry. Dave, can you put a pin in that question for our reopening plan conversation? Because I'd like to keep it to the communicable disease plan since we're on that agenda item so that we can continue to move on.
But I will answer that question about it because we've got some new things from OSAA. So we'll make sure to cover that.
Perfect. Yeah, because it's an important question for sure, Dave. Thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about the communicable disease plan?
Yeah, I'm curious why we aren't. I understand the trying to measure everybody's temperature as they come in the building is a logistical challenge. Is there a reason we wouldn't screen kids once they're already in the classroom?
I think all the same reasons still apply. The inaccuracy of it, the way we would have to do exclusion would we still be pulling kids out of class to do those things based upon the temperatures. It's not recommended by any of the groups, by OHA, by ODE, by CDC, and frankly the ACLU. But I think it's important that when we look at all of the guidance, that's what we've gotten from everyone. And so I don't see a huge value in doing that and doing it in the classroom. And then if we were doing that, if you had a school full of kids, when would you do them? Would you do them all at the same time? Would you do them earlier in the morning, all day long? Would you start, on one end of the building and, and do your temperature checks across 20 classrooms? Would you have 1 thermometer? Would you have 20 thermometers? I mean, there are just a lot of things kind of wrapped up in that, but frankly, none of the groups are recommending that we do this at all. In fact, they do not recommend universal screenings. And so I think that we're trying to follow the guidance as best we can. So I think that's why we're not considering doing it after they get in the building either.
Any other questions?
This is Rebecca. Having been a school secretary, I know what it's like when kids come to school sick, but it's the parents. I think what was read to us that we're asking the parents and the caregivers to please keep the students home if there's these signs, and I'm agree with the logistics problems. That would be a large amount of effort for, I don't know what results we'd get.
Okay. If there's no more questions, I would entertain a motion.
Point of order, I believe I had a pending motion carried over from the last meeting regarding this matter.
We were going to bring off the table. So I think you have to move to take it off the table, don't you?
I move to take my motion to direct the superintendent of schools to alter the communicable disease plan to include temperature screenings of students.
Is there a second?
Wait, Brian, can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
I'm trying to get my motion that everyone agreed to table last time off the table so that we can vote on it.
So Brian, if we vote to remove Brian's previous motion, Dave, then we can move ahead with this motion as his point of order. So he's moved that we take that motion to table it off. Is there a second?
No, my motion is to remove it, to take it off the table, which means to bring it up for a vote.
Correct. Is there a second?
I'll second then.
Okay, with a motion and a second, any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. 2, and all those opposed? And 5. So it fails with 2 yeses and 5 noes.
I'll move that we approve the revised communicable disease plan as presented.
I'll second.
And I will say that I'm going to vote for this motion that I've just made, but I consider it not a closed question because I consider that we might need to revisit this when and if they reopen schools, depending on how confident we feel that things are settled down so that we don't have to be extra precaution. I realize the logistical problems, but I would think them to be worth it if we thought it was necessary to save even 1 or 2 kids from getting sick. But I'm going to vote for this motion now.
Okay, is there further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And all those opposed? Okay, passes 5-2. Okay, next up, we have Greg to discuss potential calendar changes. So whenever you're ready, Greg.
All right, we are requesting a change to the academic calendar similar to other local school districts. The staff is requesting that the board change the academic calendar for the 2020-2021 school year. Students would begin comprehensive distance learning on September 14th, 2020. Staff would return to work as previously scheduled, and this would allow an additional week of staff time to prepare for CDL. We have not yet designated with the associations the ratio of professional development time and prep time. And so the calendar in the packet marks that week with a generic DP for development and prep time that we will figure out with the associations at a later point. The school year will not be extended at this time as we believe we're able to meet instructional hour requirements according to the Oregon Department of Education standards. And so the school year will still end on Thursday, June 17th for students, with the final day for teachers on Friday, June 18th, 2021. We have some additional work to do with the associations that may lead to some additional day changes in the calendar that we would bring to the August 25th board meeting, but we wanted to ask tonight for approval of the start change in order to publicize that to our community.
Okay, are there any questions from the board? Greg, I had a question. So I know that you said that the changing of the state would not impact our instructional hours to the state. Is that because our previous calendar was above those hours, or has the state or ODE changed instructional hour requirements during this time?
Our approved calendars are above the required amount for instructional hours. So it's partly that, and it is also the ongoing question that we're still receiving almost daily updates of guidance as to how we count attendance in distance learning and what does that look like. We're seeing with the changes in that and the flexibility that ODE is giving that we don't believe there will be a need to extend the year longer.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move that the Newburgh School District Board of Directors approve the change to the 2020-2021 academic calendar as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, the motion and a second. Is there discussion?
I want to say a little bit about this. It seems to me that this is likely a great move because we need to have that time to be as prepared as possible. Joe has said it before, and I think most people would agree that we needed, although the work last spring was heroic and people did as well as they could, we need to do better in the long run, and this is going to be a longer term proposition at making that remote learning be as fruitful as possible. And so I'm looking forward to this. I'm also looking forward to maybe having some guidelines or targets developed for us so that we would have a way of knowing that this is going to be success, that we're succeeding at meeting goals as revised by this particular having to adjust to COVID? What kind of goals are we looking for in terms of learning and student growth and so forth, so that we have a way of measuring whether we're succeeding in our efforts? So I hope that's also can be part of this. It's not part of this motion. I just want to make sure that that idea had been raised.
Okay, with a motion in a second, all those in favor, please raise your hand. And it passes unanimously. Thank you, Greg, for presenting that. Okay, next up we have our plans for school reopening. So Dr. Morlock, I'm sure this is going to be very informative. Let's go ahead.
Yeah. So as I said before, we had been working pretty diligently on creating a hybrid plan for reopening. And some of those, some things changed as far as the metrics go, and of course, in focusing on student safety and staff safety, and then community safety overall. I wanted to start very quickly just with metrics so people understand that we're still looking for a very specific number. And the challenge we have had is that our numbers continue to change. So remember that the case rate per 100,000 is supposed to be 10 or below. And our test positivity rate is supposed to be 5% or below. So we were trending a bit downward on the 5th of July that week, and we have to do this by week. We were at 54 per 100,000. We dropped down to 35 for the next week. The week of the 19th, we went back up a little bit to 39. The week of the 26th, we went up to 74 cases per 100,000. And this week, the latest thing that was just released today, on the week of the 2nd, we were at 95 per 100,000. So we have gone, we're double where we were 4 weeks ago. So we're trending kind of in the wrong direction. Again, remember, we have to have 3 weeks for us to be able to open the proper numbers. And so we still have a lot of work to do. We know that there's still community spread, and we're still encouraging everyone to wear your masks and be as diligent as possible so we can battle this back. So I wanted to start with that to begin with. Secondly, we know that we were less than perfect as we were trying to build this train on the tracks as we were trying to push it down the road starting in March. You know, we remember, and maybe not everybody remembers, I painfully remember that we were continuing to getting updating guidance. We were going to reopen, we were going to reopen, we were going to reopen. So we were constantly in this work of trying to prepare to possibly reopen before the final call for the end of the year was made. And we had as much, I think, hard work as possible to put together a distance learning plan that was relatively functional. You know, we got connectivity out to a huge portion of people. We got devices deployed. We got people fed. We got teachers and staff on board to create some things. But we do know that there was plenty that we could have done better with, of course, more planning. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things tonight. But we are covering the gamut of things. As we got news that we were all going to be moving toward, or the majority of us anyway in the state will be moving toward comprehensive distance learning, we knew that we would have to restart all of that detail work that we had done for the hybrid. So we had spent a huge amount of time, of course, putting together those plans for hybrid and trying to get that prepared and ready to go. And then those things changed. And so that same level of detail still has to be in place for making this now work. So we're reviewing, of course, some curricular choices for us to be able to provide things that are actually built to be online. It's very challenging to take things that are built for a traditional classroom, done a traditional way, and then try to convert those into an online experience. We know that even if we come back into a hybrid model, we may be going back out into a CDL if we were to have an outbreak sometime in the future. There are some districts who aren't expecting to come back for this entire school year. There are others who are expecting to come back in November, some in March. And so we're actually not going to make that determination now. We think there's a lot of work to be done, and we're not going to focus too hard on that. what we're doing, and I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Brown and to Karen Pugsley here in just a minute to talk about those things, the blueprints that you have in front of you. But I think it's important to remember that we know we have to do this well because we could be in this for a long time. The reason that the prior item was on the agenda for Greg to talk about pushing back our start to the 14th of September is that we need additional time to work through what will be new curriculum, which will, and we have a bunch of training things to do. We also have time for, we need to have time for staff to prepare to be in that model more. So having some time to work together on those, getting some professional learning, working in their PLCs are all a huge part of this. I mean, we have, you know, new ways we'll be working with all of our students with special needs, you know, ways that we have to work with our EL students, our emerging bilingual students. We have a lot of work to do around how to, you know, capturing and making sure we're tracking each kid, and there are attendance requirements, and there are requirements of time to be connected in a virtual classroom. So all of those things are coming into play, and it's a huge amount of work. And so we just want to show you tonight, we're bringing forth our plan that we will be submitting. The deadline to submit is August 17th to put these new plans into place. It was, I think, on the 15th before, or 14th, but they've moved that back to the 17th, or maybe it was always the 17th, and I've just lost track of all time and reality in a coronavirus brain time. So I do want to thank Karen specifically for doing a bunch of work today, turning it around, but I know that Karen and Derek have worked a huge amount putting this together along with my whole team. So Karen, I'm actually I'm gonna kick it over to you to talk through the blueprints as you were getting them together. Of course, we could get it into the revised board packet with some of the changes tonight. So if you wouldn't mind starting that, and we've also got Dr. Brown available, we can kind of go through the blueprints as they stand today as of 8 p.m. on Tuesday, August 11th.
Right. You have to be clear that at this point in time, this is the blueprint that is the Oregon Department of Education guidance has been utilized to prepare. And I would say that, you know, through this process, what we've really focused in on is making sure that we understand the spirit and all the meaning of the guidance. And so there's been a lot of communication with small teams. There's been communication with administrators, with each other, by level. There's been good conversations on the phone with ODE. We've gone to multiple Zoom meetings with the Oregon Department of Education to understand more about what the characteristics are of these blueprints. So we spent a lot of time, we know them very well. It's extremely difficult, I think, to kind of see outside of that little bubble of what we've been working on for quite some time. And so I think that they're pretty self-explanatory. I will say that there are different sections, and each section is absolutely connected to the guidance that is required from the Oregon Department of Education for those sections. When you see very specifics about school schedules, that's where our administrators stepped in with their teams to create those. When we're talking about large health protocols, that's coming directly from the Oregon Department of Education and the Oregon Health Authority. And so we don't have a lot of flexibility in that, right? And so I think you need to see I think that the meaning of the blueprints are really in how we need to cover both the statewide expectations and then how it shows up in our local schools. And so I think that this particular blueprint, the thing that I worked on today furiously to get ready was basically the switch to comprehensive distance learning in the first 3 sections of the document. And those sections really are specifically, we did not fill those out prior because we thought we were coming back to school. And so what we did then, from then today, I basically went through the new guidance that was just released and make sure that I updated those sections to really clarify what would it look like if we were, what is it going to look like when we're back in school and we have comprehensive distance learning as our focus. And you're going to see one section that has, it's section 2 of that comprehensive distance learning explanation. It has all the requirements by the Oregon Department of Education in little boxed pieces. So you'll see everything that we agree to so that we are going to be in compliance with their guidance. As you go through the document, you're going to see very clearly how we're going to report to the Oregon Health Authority, how we're going to make sure that we're following the distance requirements, proximity, the hand washing, and, how we're going to handle lunch, how we're going to handle getting kids on a bus, how we're going to handle cohorting of just smaller units. One of the things that our principals have been working really hard on is that they went to every single classroom in the district and measured it to make sure that we could meet the requirements for distance in classrooms, because classrooms are not uniform across our district. Certain schools have larger classrooms, other schools have smaller classrooms. And so we use those measurements to make sure that we were actually hitting the required distance by the Oregon Department of Education. So you're going to see that very specific piece as well, the number of students that we can have in a classroom. In terms of secondary, I think we're up between 15 to 18 students per cohort, and I think it's a little bit smaller in elementary, but still 13 to 15 kids. As you go through the entire process also, and it's a fairly large document. We know it well because it's very large and we have many, many pages. But I think you just need to know, I don't want to go through all of those details. I think it's really important to have questions about any details that really catch your attention. And I know we can answer those. Derek and I have been through this document many, many times. I think I just want to leave you with the understanding that this is a document that is actually a moving document, that it basically will or may change in the future based on new information about the infection rates, new information about how we handle the safety procedures in a public school. It can really be related also to how many students and teachers are in our classrooms and how we respond to that and how our staffing is looking. So you just got to realize that all of those pieces are still in play. However, we are ready to submit this to the Oregon Department of Education so they can then look at it and approve it or ask us to continue to work on it. Derek, you want to add something?
Only just to reinforce your comments about the fluid nature of the documents. And I also think that making the shift from opening and hybrid to a comprehensive distance learning model actually gives us more time to continue to refine our thinking about the hybrid model, which is where we'd spent most of our spring and summertime thinking. So with the comprehensive distance learning model, we've made the adjustments that we need to, and we're still putting some pieces in place to make all of that happen. But this will give us some additional time to continue to think through what that hybrid model looks like, and we will watch metrics and hope that we can get to that as soon as possible.
And it's also, we'll be putting together some presentations for next week for the community, because I know there are a lot of questions around the difference between comprehensive distance learning and our COA program. So we are working on those currently, putting together some presentations, and then we will do those some live sessions with our building administrators to talk through the differences between what a comprehensive distance learning program is in contrast to the Chehalem Online Academy. So I just wanted to alert folks to that, and we'll get communication out soon about times and dates. Actually, I think we put those out, Greg, if I'm not mistaken. Did that go?
Yes, that went out today.
Today.
Tuesday, 6 p.m. for elementary, 7 for secondary, and board members should have also received a copy of that communication.
Okay. So just highlighting for those, go ahead.
One of the things I really want to also really identify is that when we were doing this work, it wasn't just a few people, it was lots of people who were doing the work. But I was really struck by the amount of concern and care that was taken as we went through these pieces of necessary components of a plan. The folks who were working on it, I never heard anything but care and concern about our students and our staff, and making sure that we did everything in our power to make sure that there was safe reentry, and going above even recommendations if we needed to do that in order for us to make sure that our students were safe and our faculty were safe as well. And I think that that's something that really struck me from the work, as well as every single conversation that I was part of in the small teams, but also when we got together at the district level. Educational equity was at the forefront of all of our thinking as we worked through these plans, making sure we would do anything possible to make sure that discrepancies in learning opportunities were not fostered through the work that we were doing. We wanted to make sure that students have an equal opportunity to access meaningful education, no matter what the model. I think that that's really important to hear that from us.
I had a question about COA and if we have, what our numbers are looking like at this point as far as folks migrating over to COA. I would imagine it's going to be higher than it's been in the past, and just wanted to know what impact, what adjustments you're going to need to make for staffing on that to make sure that's fully covered, and any budget impacts that might cause us.
Sure. That's a great question. Again, part of the reason that we're going to be working, putting out more information about the difference between CDL and COA is that I think that there is still some trepidation about us coming back into a hybrid model. So I think some of that's happened early. As far as the numbers go right now, we have 267 students signed up for the K-8 COA. So these are including the returning students that we've had before and new students that turn in applications. At Catalyst High School, we have 165 currently, which includes returning Catalyst students and new high school COA students. We also have about another 150 who have inquired about it, and so we've asked them to watch our Zoom meetings next week. That's why we pushed out the deadline as well, because we knew people wanted to make a better informed decision. And as we were affirming the plans, we wanted to make sure that they had the best information possible to make that choice. And so, yeah, then there's a staffing issue about where people were replaced to be able to provide that education, and that comes later. A lot of the stuff will be happening as we solidify. That's why we had to set some kind of a deadline so we would know what that number was. But we also didn't want people to feel pressured by the deadline for this coming week without having more information, because we got a lot of requests to discuss the difference between CDL, excuse me, and COA. But those are the numbers as they stand right now. So significantly higher, of course, than we've had in the past. But I do believe that a lot of folks are thinking about, their trepidation about sending kids into the building. And so some of those, of course, were probably signed up even before we were going into those things.
I had a quick question, and it's more of a point of clarification. One of the things I kept kind of seeing popping up was it said updated outbreak response protocol is forthcoming. And I'm assuming that's because things are changing so quickly and guidelines are changing so quickly, but that is something that was a theme throughout all the reopening plans. And I'm wondering if you could just, am I on the right page with that, or am I off?
Yes, you're absolutely on the right page with that, which is basically making sure people know when they're reading the document that updates are going to affect some of the details.
It looks like Dave is off the meeting, but the question came up earlier about athletics and extracurricular stuff. And just to clarify, I feel like my understanding was that OSAA has postponed all that until the spring, that they're not planning to have any fall sports. Is that correct?
That is correct. And let me pull up those dates so we just have them. I'll make sure I get the right document for that. So they have decided to keep all 3 seasons, but they're moving them quite a bit back into other parts of the year. So they're going to be doing it after that, and I'll talk about those in a second. But they're also allowing some training and conditioning depending upon the kind of sport. So schools that are participating in distance learning can only allow their school sports team to participate in training, conditioning and competition for outdoor, non-contact and or minimal or medium contact sports. And those would include tennis, swimming, golf, cross country, track and field. And then some minimal and medium contact sports. They're including softball, baseball, soccer, volleyball, women's lacrosse, and flag football. They are only allowing training and conditioning for outdoor full contact sports. That's during this fall season. Full contact sports are included are football, rugby, wrestling, cheerleading, basketball, hockey, dance, water polo, and men's lacrosse. And then training and conditioning for all indoor sports. There are other kind of requirements that have come out from them, but essentially they're allowing some training and conditioning, which they've not traditionally allowed for coaches to be involved with in the past. So they have, they've kind of moved those so we're able to do those things. And I want to give you the dates as well. So they're they're calling season 1 basically from this August time through the end of the calendar year. So traditional winter activities they're planning on taking place in January and February. They're calling that season 2. And then the fall activities that we would normally do in the fall will be in season 3. So that's March and April. And the spring activities in May and June, called season 4. They're going to essentially have a 7-week regular season. They will follow up with a culminating week. They don't know if that will be playoffs, or if that'll be regional playoffs, that'll be a bowl kind of a situation. They haven't done all of those final plans yet. But they're essentially moving everything back so they can try to run the 3 seasons and even be shortened. Of course, those things could change if things don't improve or if they change in a different direction. But currently, that's where they are. And then if they're doing the outdoor training, they have to follow all of the health protocols, the county things, and then of course the guidelines by the OHA, which are relatively challenging. And that they could do that kind of work at least for now, but there won't be any contests until we get to the season 2, which is the January, February timeframe. They are still working on, I will add, things on the dance, drill, speech, solo music, choir, band, orchestra. They don't have a defined season for those yet. Those are also managed by the OSAA. They're still working. I mean, who'd have thunk we would be living in a world where choir was the most dangerous activity. So they are looking, you know, it's crazy. So they're looking at when they will run those kind of things and how they'll run them. So they're working with music teachers and other national organizations to figure out how to do that. But it's quite a bit of change, and that all just happened very recently. I think it was on the 5th of August. They put out a press release on that.
Yeah, and I know all this is new, and so we most likely don't have sports plans in place yet. But you know, if we are doing training and conditioning as we come into fall, you know, one issue we'd have, since we're providing transportation, making sure that we're being equitable and access for everybody on that. I know that's to come, and that's just kind of my 2 cents as you're working on that.
Yeah, yeah. I actually do. I worry about this because I myself, when I'm practicing a sport, am rather competitive, and so I'm not sure that I would count soccer as non-contact. But you know, getting in close and being around all those people, you know, I have some concerns around the health and safety protocols about how they run conditioning. I do know that I watched my own son's group, and he was on a club soccer team, and they were very clear about the distancing. They had no contact. They had these big grids, and they basically did a bunch of individual drills pretty far from each other, even at water breaks. So there are ways to do it well. There aren't necessarily lots of answers, but we've had plenty of sports questions. So those will continue to come. I was glad to get some level of specificity from the OSA, and I know that they're just getting hammered with questions and emails and all kinds of things. And I think their board made the right choice to delay further back and try to still include every activity. After, I think it'll be great. We'll see if it works out, but that's where we are right now.
Are there any other questions from the board regarding the reopening plan?
I have 1 or 2. The plan's kind of impressive. All these little boxes with all the things that look like promises of what we're going to do. They don't actually say how we're going to do them in those boxes, but they say that we're going to have, you know, everything from orientations to summative and informative and summative assessments and progress reports, and both on achievement and, at least for parents and maybe others, on whether they're attending. I don't know how we define that, but all that's very good. I like to see that. How far have we gotten? I mean, there are hundreds of promises if you count the repeated promises from school to school. how far have we gotten to fleshing out how we're going to keep all those promises?
Great question. I would say that that's what I updated today, which means this is rather new information for us. So we're basically having to, you know, for me to write it down and put it into the document was the most important part of understanding that the work ahead is to make sure that we follow these requirements. They're not recommendations, they're requirements from the Oregon Department of Education, and how we make sure that we use our resources appropriately to fulfill our agreement, that we will follow these requirements. Some of that will be easier, some pieces will be easier than others. But I would say that in order to make comprehensive distance learning work, these requirements are what the state of Oregon is asking us to do to make sure students have a positive educational experience and parents know what's going on. So I think
earlier in the meeting, I said I was looking forward to seeing how we would know that we are keeping these kinds of commitments. At that time, I was thinking about the broader picture, but now I'm thinking about all these individual commitments. I don't really think as a board we're going to get involved in the details of how you keep these commitments, but I think it's a board matter how well we do at keeping the commitments overall. And it would help us if there are meaningful goals, benchmarks, something that are set in advance that would tell us how well, what we think we can do, and then reports later telling us in general, again, how well did we do at all of these. I'm not usually considered to be a soft-hearted when it comes to grading, although the myth exceeded the reality of my hard-nosedness. But still, I don't expect us to meet what might be, I'm just estimating a couple thousand goals here, all of them. But I think that as a board, we should be held accountable for keeping track of how we do at meeting these goals. That has a bearing on all kinds of questions, not just the general performance of the schools, but whether we have adopted the right policy or the right balance of policies and how we deliver education and so forth. And if we don't have any indication, any idea how well we did, then we can't make decisions. So these goals are sort of hinted at in these, but they're not defined. And I think that would be a good, I mean, I'm hoping that we can do some of that locally, and that extra time might help us get that done. It still seems like a huge job, but from a board point of view, from my point of view on the board, it seems like we need to be able to say, okay, here were the targets, and here's how well we did at those targets, and give us a baseline from which to compare in case we ever do it again, or if it follows into the second semester or whatever. That's just really important data that we need to have.
No, I love the idea of making sure that we have a plan in place for segments. And I think one of the things that I would say is clustering some of those goals into manageable project planning is definitely important. And then to make sure that we report to our constituents and to our board about how we accomplish them. And I would think that there's a lot of flexibility about some of the local pieces of how we do it. It doesn't mean that that's not the goal. The goal is we want to make sure that these pieces of communication take place, that there are so many different components of how digital learning actually works, like privacy. How are we going to make sure that we secure student privacy, which is a big component of this as well? And how do we make sure that we report accurately with formative and summative assessments that are standards-based? The work is the same, it's just we're doing it in a new way. And so I think that that's why the state of Oregon made sure that they were very discreet about the pieces. It's really up to us, and I agree with you, that we put that into some meaningful format and make sure that people are holding the water on that and making sure that we're reporting on it.
Format with standards, with
yes,
benchmarks or what milestones or something. So we can, when people do really well, we ought to be able to recognize and say, here's how we know you did really well. And rather than just sort of guessing.
Well, thank you, Ron.
Right, and this is, you know, it's important to remember that this is going to be the school experience for all of our students for the foreseeable several months. And so we need to make sure that, you know, we have guaranteed and viable curriculum, that we are checking in with students who are struggling like we always do when they're in our buildings. We are supposed to essentially, you know, and I'm glad you actually called them promises, because they are. You're making a contract to say, here are the things that are expected of us to make sure that your student is not experiencing another lost amount of time. We know that for some students who checked out in the spring because of all the other kinds of things, we can't continue that. We don't know how long we'll be doing this. It's important that we do it really well, and that we do have summative and formative assessments, that we do check in on kids who are slipping, that we do provide extension activities for students who need those. You know, this is going to be our school experience for every kid, and we want to make sure that this year, even though it might be weird for all of us adults, you know what, this is how we're doing school this year, or at least this is how we're doing school for the next several months, and it has to be good. And that's what I said earlier, just that there is just as many details in this plan that we have to develop as we were working on for the hybrid plan. Anybody who thinks that this is an easy cop-out is kidding themselves. This is a huge lift for our staff, and it's a huge lift for families, and we're not taking any of it lightly. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ron, because it is important for people to know that, you know, this comprehensive distance learning, we have a lot of work to do to make it right. And we also have to continue to help kids progress through school. And this is going to be one of their years. And so it's important that we do it well, because, you know, the ramifications later on of us doing a poor job, you know, will be with us for a while. So it's a big deal for us.
I don't know if this is appropriate now or not, but this is just a thought and a concern that I've heard from families is, if families need to work, the older kids become the caregiver. How are we going to ensure that as these older kids are high schoolers, I'm guessing, or middle schoolers, are helping our elementary kids going through school at a comprehensive distance learning, that they're not also missing their education? I know we've talked about the support and encouraging and reaching out, but I know that if I was in school during this time, I would be in charge of my siblings, and my schooling would not be the priority. So how would we deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we have been talking about or looking at shifted times. You know, are there opportunities for us to look at you know, synchronous learning where we actually connect and we have people in, like we're doing current, like in this meeting. Is there an opportunity for us to do that? I mean, it's complicated because you only have so many folks doing the work, right? But, you know, do we record sessions so they can catch up on them like you can do in a Khan Academy situation? Do we have folks who work a shifted schedule and are able to be that resource for people to connect with? Mm-hmm. You know, there are a lot of those, and we found out, actually, I had a conversation with Brian Wood, and he was talking about a student who did very well in summer school and did terribly in the distance learning in the spring. And it turns out that that was his exact situation, where that he's taking care of his siblings, and then, but because we had some evening sessions for our summer school, the migrant summer school this year, he did exceptionally well because he now could focus on his things because he was done, because, you know, parents were home from working. And so we have a lot of work to do around that, but those are some of the things that we're trying to look at. How do we possibly shift time for the kinds of classes that need that more support? We are hiring specifically a bilingual technology support person, required bilingual in English and Spanish, because we know we'll have lots and lots of questions. And we know that that'll be important for us because we already are pretty stretched thinly, and having someone who can also be that resource support for families when they call and I need to know how to connect the kid, or I need to know how to get into this thing, or I'm stuck on that. We want to make sure that we provide all those supports. So we've actually posted, and we'll be doing some interviews here coming up shortly for a bilingual technology support person as part of our overall planning. But it's a great question, Ines, really. It's we know that's going to be an issue for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, and in looking at, you know, we're constantly analyzing the data and the achievement gap, and we see which kids are most impacted or left behind. So this is a perfect opportunity for those kids to really fall through the cracks completely.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we keep that on our radar and not forget that.
Right. And you know, what I've really appreciated about the Department of Education is that they start every presentation and they start every document with equity as the center thing they talk about every single time. So I commend them for, you know, staying the course on talking about that. And, you know, even in their presentation earlier today, it was, you know, those were their initial slides. Like, here are, you know, we're doing health and safety for everybody, and then, you know, remembering all the issues around you know, equity of access, and, you know, how are you going to do those things? Support for live peer-to-peer interaction for all kids, depending on how we can make that work, and keeping all of that in mind. So I commend them for that. That's hard to keep in focus when it's a lot easier to just do what you can for the most people. But they've really pushed us to put into our plans, you know, how we'll support students of all kinds who need different kinds of things. And that means we can't do it all the same way we've always sort of done it. This is actually the perfect opportunity to not do everything.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. We know that the system has not worked. Right. So how can we reinvent it? Or this is a perfect opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's, I've read a few of those too, you know, those opinion pieces just about, you know, the system wasn't necessarily working as well as we wanted to. Here's an opportunity for us to make some shifts and some changes. And so I know our people are going to work very hard on that, but that's certainly something that is not being lost in the conversation about how we support kids, because we know people have to work. I mean, that it makes sense, and that's a hard deal. So, but thank you for raising that. I appreciate that.
Dr. Joe, what about the kids who fell behind or who didn't succeed in the spring? Do we have a process to help them come up to grade level, or to get the information, the education they lost in the spring?
Yes, great question, Rebecca. So there were two parts to that. One, students who did not receive a passing mark. So if they received an incomplete, part of the requirements on the district was to create a plan with that student to be able to have them get to the point where they would be a passing grade. Many of those, and I wish I had the number because I didn't know you were going to ask that question, but it's a great question. Many of them worked during the summer as part of our summer school to catch up on some of those credits and to make those gains. We also have, again, they have through the end of this school year. So by September, and I think they've already done this actually at Newburgh High, they have to have an individual plan for each kid to reach that passing level for last spring. Now, that does not say that we're going to know where everybody's progress ended. And I think that that'll be one of the really important steps at the beginning of the school year, is to see where we are. You know, where do we end up? We know we're going to be all over the board. We know we've probably lost some instruction. We've gained some instruction. We think that there will probably be larger gaps than there have been in the past, but we don't know that until we get kids in. Back to Ron's question about formative and summative assessments, you know, we need to know where students are on the standards. And so we'll do, I mean, some of that is just assessing where we are, and then we'll be learning about that in our professional development too. So let's figure out what we have to do to adjust to make up for lost time. But the students specifically who did not pass, we either have a plan for the handful who are left for the rest of this coming school year. They have until the end of the year. But many of those students did catch up some things during the summertime, so we were able to connect with many of them and get that done. The high school got right on that as soon as that guidance was put out, and made plans and connected with kids. So a lot of that got done early summer.
I have a question that what Ines said reminded me of. I've heard of at least one or maybe two cases where parents have sort of kind of banded together and they're going to help each other monitor their kids while they're at home. I don't know exactly all the details of all of them, but you know, sort of private arrangements where they cooperate to cover to have adult presence while the kids are supposed to be doing their schoolwork and stuff. Is there any potential there for the district to help out by helping incentivize or coordinate people looking for cooperative arrangements like that so that people can go to work?
Well, I mean, I think anything that helps our students is a great thing for us to get involved in. I noticed, I saw the email chain where you had asked some questions of one of the groups that was working. I think it's hard for us to know who's actually putting those all together. I know that there is some interest in doing that. My one concern, not one concern, but one of my main concerns would be for the district's ability to ensure access for all students who want to be part of those things. So I don't know how they're being put together necessarily, or what the requirements are, or if there's a cost. I know that there are some who are charging a small fee, and then they're trying to raise some money so they could, allow some scholarship students. But I think one of the challenges for us would be to guarantee the equity of access to all of those. I think I know that some of those groups are forming kind of ad hoc, but I'm not sure exactly what the district could do without having to take on probably the whole project in order to ensure that equity of access for anybody who wanted it.
Yeah, I think the district taking on the project is a problem, because then we become responsible for it, and somebody might be deemed to be an employee and all that stuff. I don't want to go there. But I'm just wondering if there's anything short of that might help. So the people who are working on it now, the ones that I know about, are all people with relatively high incomes and have, options that they can create with their resources. I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way to help, I don't know, broker is probably not the right word, but just help people find each other who don't have as much time to do the transaction cost of setting these things up, time or resources. You can easily imagine how it would be a big boom to say a group of 5 families if they could trade off one day a week watching each other's kids and get to work the other 4 days or something like that. So if it was, I don't know if I'm just asking if there's any creative thing we could do to help those things happen for people who don't have the extra resources to undertake the transaction costs of setting that up.
Sure. Well, we do meet with all of our building administrators tomorrow I'm sure they're looking forward to the 8 hours of fun tomorrow to work through these things. But that's a question we can certainly pose because I'm sure they hear far more because they're closer to the ground on hearing what's happening within their building. So that's something we can certainly pose as a question. I'm sure they'll have some better thinking on it than I do, at least at this point. But I think those cooperative agreements work well for the folks who can make it work. I know there'll be more of them forming up. I hope there are more who are done at a no cost as well, for people to share the load on those things. But
Okay, we are 2 minutes from our break time. Are there any more questions from the board? There was also some confusion. This is not an action item. This is actually an information item. So
correct.
Ron, one more?
No, if you tell your students you're 2 minutes from break time, your class is over at that point. So
1 minute
it's not
now,
a mistake
so.
a veteran teacher would make.
Okay. All right, well, let's take our 5-minute break and come back at 8:40 for our bond discussion with Shannon and Karina. Okay, we are back at 8:40. Let's give Karina, there she is. Let's see if Joe hops on. There he is. All right, we are back in session. Go ahead, Shannon and Karina.
Well, thank you, and good evening to the Newburgh School District Board of Directors. I've been in a habit these last few meetings of following some of the developments for our community, and I admire the challenging conversations that you guys are engaging in and the good work you're doing. So with that being said, I have the tremendous honor of representing our construction bond committee, which was to remind you, this is a very diverse committee formed of community members, parents, teachers, administrators, former students, community partners. So we really tried to gather every perspective in this process. And I am aware both of the briefing that you had in your board packet, so hopefully you had time to prepare for that. And then I was also present for the presentation last board meeting from Karina and Jeremy on what the proposed bond package was, what the polling results are. So you've had 2 weeks now to think about that. I'm here to officially recommend that the school board adopts the bond proposal for $141 million. I have a couple talking points that I would just like to, and this is in summary of what the committee wishes to represent or to express to the board of directors. So first of all, regardless of whether or not we move forward with the $105 million package or the $141 million package, we have about the same amount of work to do either way. The same amount of work with a PAC, with working with our community, but also with PR strategies, with working with those polling numbers. So it's not that much of a bigger lift for the workload. The polls are approachable with a higher amount. And we're certainly not going to have less work to do later. This is foreseeably our best opportunity to fund work that is critical to the physical structures of our school district. And we're talking about safety for our students with a completely different sensitivity than we were as a committee back in November, December, January, when we were first putting this together. And if anything, we would just urge the board to consider that with the safety upgrades that we now need living in a pandemic world, this is our best opportunity to get our schools up to a safer capacity for communicable diseases. And we are able to pivot these plans. A great thing about them, down to the details, they're somewhat fluid. So we can look at COVID-related safety accommodations as we're considering the physical adjustments. Pursuing the larger bond allows us to do more of that work for every school in the district. If we start cutting the budget, then we may not have the same opportunities across the board for all of the adjustments that we desperately need to make. I would also remind the board that $141 million is our maximum financial leverage. This is what we are planning not to exceed, which is why we also have a contingency plan in the budget. And I know the board at your last meeting had concerns about the economic recession that we're entering in. We can make adjustments throughout the bond, but we can't go back for more money if we need more money later. We can spend less than we are approved for, but we cannot exceed what we're planning for. So if anything, you're providing a financial safety net for our community as we continue to be surprised by some of these challenges and some of these developments, that we're able to have choices now that if we go for a smaller bond package, we would not have those same choices even a year from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. Finally, the cuts required to meet the $105 million budget, the committee felt those cuts substantially compromised the values expressed by our community. Again, a very diverse community. We really sought to include every opinion, every perspective. I thought it was a beautifully collaborative effort where disagreeing opinions were brought together with this plan that we could all stand behind. We would compromise the culture that we feel is most important. And when you put it into those terms of what we're providing for our community, for our students, for the next generation of students, what you should also see is that you have a strong sector of our community is willing to do the extra work to protect the values that we have. So with that, that explains the reasoning behind the committee's decision to recommend moving forward with the $141 million bond as opposed to the $105 million bond. I know Karina has more to contribute, and I will continue to be available either now or after Karina, sorry, I have a close friend named Katrina, to answer any questions. Certainly on behalf of the committee, you've been very well informed, and so that's what I would add. Do you have questions now, or Karina, take it away?
I'll go ahead and ensure that if they have questions, I was just going to share the bond package that I believe is in your board packet, has been in your board packet for a week, but for those watching online, talk through the projects that we had. I know there were questions last time around potential COVID benefits of any of the projects and the work that we've done to try and identify the aspects of those projects that can be used to look at both the sort of current pandemic world, but then also the post-pandemic world that we will eventually find ourselves. So unless you have any questions for me or for Shannon prior to me going through this, I was just hoping to spend a few minutes kind of walking through this quickly with you. Okay, I'm seeing Brandy's head go up and down, so I'll do that. As you well know, we have a total bond package of 141 million. That was the idea, was to try and present the recommendation of the board of the bond development committee. Of that, about $17 million is for an expansion of Edwards and modernization. So that would allow us to not only increase the school's capacity, but then also create extended learning areas that could provide additional space to meet some of those social distancing requirements. Likewise, in the design of a new elementary to replace Dundee, while it doesn't necessarily increase capacity because it's still 350 students in the initial plan, it does provide for additional space to meet social distancing requirements and also allows us to incorporate all of the HVAC, filtration, locations of health offices, things that we are now thinking about as an architecture profession and as engineers would be beneficial in our post-pandemic world. The safety and security upgrades district-wide, again, while these in almost all cases include kind of a remodel of the admin to ensure that it's closest to the front entry and that you're able to kind of reconfigure those to provide for safe and secure access to vestibules. It also gives us an opportunity to provide options for creating places for health screening and then also isolation if that should become necessary within the school environment. The covered play areas, I think this is one that the committee went back and forth on, quite frankly. Many times there was conversation about the value of that. In our last meeting, I think people were happy that we kept them in because if anything, we're seeing now relative to the CDC and OHA recommendations is that open air environments reduce transmission rates of the virus. And so having extra space at the middle schools and the elementary schools to provide for learning opportunities under shelter would be advantageous. CTE STEM improvements at the high school, including the greenhouse. We could also say that, again, as you're reconfiguring those spaces, we'll have an opportunity to look at mechanical systems filtration. I think that really is true. That would be a lens that we use as we start to think about the improvements for all of these, because you have to, as you're dealing with whether it's science classrooms, STEM classrooms, you're going to be dealing with ventilation, and so being able to incorporate those best practices in that would be important. The maintenance improvements, again, recognizing that there is a lot of work to be done relative to deferred maintenance. We have begun discussions in pretty deep detail with your maintenance folks to talk about and engineers that we know and work with that are starting to do this work across Oregon to really start to think about what are ways that we can increase air exchange rates. The more air exchanges per hour you have, the higher the filtration is. And then also looking at ways that you can do enhanced filtration as part of that. So that will be the main focus of that. And this was also an area where there was discussion about potentially taking some of the Awesome Grant funds and ensuring that they are dedicated kind of to additional COVID related responses. So Catalyst, while again, the funds that we're talking about aren't necessarily in direct relation, in this case, to funding online education, you will see that below in sort of some of the tech money. What it does do is allows us to address potential increased enrollment in alternative programs that people are now starting to see, hey, this might work for me, whether it's your online academy or whether it's Catalyst. There is money to be able to address that increased demand that maybe people were pretty used to being in a traditional educational system, and now we're looking for some alternatives that will allow you to still keep them in the district. The resiliency and disaster preparedness of about $1.7 million. Again, starting to think about how schools can be community resources, whether that is ensuring that you're able to provide food for those that face food insecurity, in just like you did in this past year to sort of greater capacities. I think that allows you to really kind of get a better leverage point for that. The flexible learning space educational upgrades, again, gives us an opportunity to provide right-sized spaces to disperse students and then meet some of that social distancing requirements across all of your elementary schools, across all of the schools in the district. Again, you'll see here that we have science lab upgrades, again, as I was saying, even though we didn't note that had specific COVID related impacts, as I was discussing earlier, as we start to do those upgrades, and certainly as we start to think about improved ventilation, those will have an impact. ADA accessibility improvements, obviously much needed focus on gaining entry restrooms, ensuring that you have equitable access to your facilities is of paramount importance, was something that the community and the committee valued. And then finally, the dollars that we have allocated, about $1.3 million, sorry, $2.5 million for technology upgrades, would allow you to basically revamp your head-end system, ensure that as you move towards more digital learning, that you're able to have the infrastructure to support that work across the district, both in your facilities and then in a whatever the future of education looks like, being able to support that both inside your buildings and then within the community. And then finally, the health clinic renovation at the existing high school. Obviously, this is a fairly easy story to tell because it provides direct benefit to the Newburgh community and the high school, not only during this pandemic, but then beyond. So with that, you see that we have a total of about $129 million of direct, what we're calling direct costs. Now know that there's also contingency, what we call construction contingency in these numbers as they were estimated. And in addition to that, we're planning for, as Shannon was saying, ensuring that we have a district level contingency to provide for those unknowns, which by the time you then add the bond costs, which are management costs, the cost of selling the bond, permit fees, your architectural and engineering services, all of your program management services, all of those would get you to that grand total of $141 million. So really my intention here was just to provide kind of the package in support of what Shannon presented. I will reiterate what I said last time, was that your bond development committee worked hard and created quite a list of priorities and was able to arrive at this final package as their preferred package. And that is what we're presenting tonight. And we are prepared to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Shannon and Karina. I'll open it up to the board. Are there any questions from the board?
I didn't have a question, but I did want to say this package represents a culmination of years of community input, beginning first with our long-range facilities committee, then rolling into the bond development committee. You know, we've had folks come and make public comment at meetings regarding our facilities, particularly the HVAC at the high school, but also, you know, individual classroom issues have been brought to us. This is vitally important that we approve and move forward with this. You know, the deadline is the 15th, so we really don't have any room to, you know, tinker with this more. But I feel like there's been so much work that's been put into this. This is a package that's ready to go and really is going to benefit the district.
Karine?
Yes.
Could you,
yes, Rebecca.
could you mention again, if we pass this, we'll have a matching grant or matching funds?
Yes. So I believe Nikki presented this last time, that since our original thought of going for this in May, there have been changes across other districts, and Newburgh has moved up the line of priority, and so would be guaranteed what's called awesome grants by the matching grants. You have to go for a bond in November, and you have to be successful in winning that. But should you do that, I believe you're guaranteed around 5 million and change, right? Right, Nikki?
Yeah, that's correct. It's just over 5 million.
So that again is yet another reason to sort of maximize the leverage. I believe the initial ask when the paperwork went in for the awesome grant was about 150 million. So you would be well within your the requirements for that.
What would that 5 million be available for? Would it be designated for some particular use, or would it come off the 141, or how would that work?
I believe the intention would be, it would not come off the 141. It would be additional resources to the district that you would initially apply to the district contingency, and then allow that to inform it. As you can imagine, Ron, when this bond package was put together, there were a lot of things left on the table. And then not the least of which are additional COVID related improvements.
I don't have to imagine them, I remember them. Yeah. So.
Yeah, correct. Some of your community members may not. And so being able to adequately fund those would be the discretion of the district, and also under the advice of a bond oversight committee that would again be part of a citizens group that would be charged with sort of the financial and fiduciary responsibility of ensuring that you're shepherding your district's money in the best way possible.
And if I could add, for just to supplement Director Mock's comment, the Bond Development Committee did prioritize the projects that we could not fund with this bond. So we're already prepared should those matching funds need a good place for our district. And again, very well informed. I really appreciate the fact that we were reminded that this is not the work of 1 year, it's the work of several years. And this has been a very thoughtful process. We're clear on what our values are, what our community stands for, the kind of education and next generation approach that we want to have for our students. So it's a conversation we can say with confidence that we're prepared for.
Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. My dogs have questions. Sorry about that.
They're just lending their support.
They can't even vote. All right, sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
So it looks like we have a total of $61 million deferred maintenance, and we're taking care of 18 million with this bond. Can you speak to what's in the 43 million that we're leaving out there?
You know, I think that the goal of the 18 million was to focus on what we call sort of priority one, the things that are systems that are either failing or that are within the end of their useful life. So that's going to be our priority. The things in your deferred maintenance list. So when a deferred maintenance list is put together, it is literally everything that requires maintenance. Some things don't require maintenance for you're able to identify for 10, for 15 years. You know, you can, for example, look at a roof and say this roof has another 10 years on the warranty, but you still list it on your deferred maintenance list. So they would be everything from architectural finish upgrades, whether it's flooring, wall treatment, roofs. There are things that have not necessarily met the end of their useful life. And those would be the areas that you try to prioritize against, right? So I'm not going to tell you, however, that 61 million, that 18 million will take care of all of your priority 1 and priority 2 items, because it likely won't. This was an area that the committee really struggled with to try to figure out what the right dollar figure was. I think there were folks that wanted to fund it at the full amount, but it would have taken other projects off the list. And so I think it was an area where the committee compromised and said, we're going to find those things that we can do that have the highest need and will have the greatest impact, and do those first, and any other resources we can bring to bear, whether it's through Awesome Grant, bond premiums, to ensure that we really are taking care of the resources that we have and prolonging their life as much as possible was the focus of the work.
And if I remember correctly as well, Karina, we had this conversation as a bond committee where we discussed other options for revenue that we would have in addition to the construction bond. So we prioritized those most critical projects for deferred maintenance within this bond package, and those projects that cannot be funded through other avenues or through other opportunities. If you've ever entered the grant world, there are more rules and regulations than banking, perhaps. So those projects can be very limited, very exclusive. And so this gave us an opportunity, again, to address critical need, but also there will be freedom to pursue alternate sources of funding that are better suited for certain projects than a bond would be. So we did have a conversation, correct?
That is correct.
And the other thing that I would add is the $61 million amount that came from the Long Range Planning Committee work 2 years ago, and was actually simply created by a formula that comes from the state looking at facility condition and assigning a number to that. And then as the work has gone on with the district and with the bond development committee since then, it's done all the work that Shannon has talked about to actually identify more of those projects and get specific things prioritized into the right place so that we can touch the most important needs with the 18 million that's available. And like Karina said, everyone really wrestled with this because there is obviously a lot of need, and it was trying to find the way of balancing the package according to the values that the group had. And I know that Karina's reminded us a lot of times that with all the work that's gone into this, all of this work before the bond is passed is at a high level, and there continues to be more and more detailed work done by all of these architectural firms and all of these organizations as we hopefully get to the place of passing this bond. So there's a lot of work that has been done and a lot of work still ahead of us.
And I was an observer at most of the bond development committee meetings, and one of the discussions too was that the 18 million for the deferred maintenance is 18 million is going to be applied directly to deferred maintenance, but we'll get at some of the remainder in the upgrades that we're doing. So some deferred maintenance that needs done in our learning spaces will get taken care of through that through the upgrades that are done. It won't get at all of it, unfortunately, but it will make a big, it will have a big impact.
That's exactly right. And you're able to leverage and get what we sort of call twofers, right? That there is a system that needs to be upgraded. And as you're looking at, for example, your STEAM improvements, you would be addressing that. So you're able to then say, all right, we don't have to spend that out of our 61 million. Let's focus on those that we do really have to address.
Are there any other questions for the board or from the board?
I had one more question. Do we have any estimates on how much the taxes associated with this bond package will cost the average Newburgh family?
Nikki, I believe there were more recent calculations done by Piper Sandler that Nikki shared with us last time, and I want to be sure that I don't want to give out the wrong information. So Nikki, will you remind us dollar per thousand?
Right, I believe the most current one is 1.52 per thousand.
That's $1.52 per thousand all in.
Yeah, so whatever you want to consider an average household, I have not calculated that number, put that number out there, but it's $1.52 per thousand.
And it is per thousand of assessed value, which is important for people to remember.
Not
it's
real
not
value.
not the real market value, how much you'd sell your house for, but the actual assessed value. So that's and that's been, of course, collared by Measure 5 for many years. So it's important to remember that. So when you're looking at your tax statement, two values: one's assessed value, and one is real market value. And it's the $1.52 per thousand of assessed value. And that has changed because we were at, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we were at $1.99 or $1.98 several months ago. And so the funding stream has changed a bit. And so we're down to $1.52 per thousand of assessed value.
If it's helpful for that, I know for Yamhill County residents, we do get a tax statement that's specific to property values where it lists those two figures. It comes in a yellow background. It's mailed out once a year. I saved mine in a filing cabinet. So for board members or people in the audience, if you're curious, you can calculate based on that total. So $1.52 on assessed value, not retail value.
Right. So for if you were at a $350,000 home, it would be basically 350 times $1.52, which would come up to $532 for the year.
And the other thing to remind people is that they are already paying 78 cents per thousand right now. So that amount that Joe just gave is not going to be the increase. That's the total amount. So we'd have to actually figure out what the increase is on that.
Okay. If there are no more questions from the board, I would entertain a motion.
I move that the Newburgh School Board of Directors approve the bond title by title only.
You might have to read the whole wording. I mean, it does. Greg, what do you think? Because you reworded this for us.
Yeah, in the original bond packet, I didn't actually put the title in there, and it feels like we need to say the title if we're approving it by title only. So your revised packet I sent out this afternoon should have that.
Okay. Bob, would you like to reword that or have somebody else make the motion?
No, I've got the wording here.
Okay.
I move that the Newburgh District Board of Directors adopt Resolution 2021-04, Resolution of Newburgh School District number 29J, Yamhill, Washington, and Clackamas Counties, Oregon, calling a measure election to submit to the electors of the district the question of contracting general obligation bonded indebtedness in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $141 million to finance capital costs and related matters by title only.
I'll second.
Okay. With the motion and a second, is there further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, all those opposed? Inez, are you abstaining?
I'm voting for it, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so it passes by how many of us are there now? Five yeses, 1 no. Greg, did you get all that?
I did not get who voted no. I was pulling down the screen. I need to
That's
know.
okay. Brian voted no, and the rest voted yes. So it passes. All right. Thank you, Karina and Shannon, and thank you to the Bond Development Committee and Long Range Facilities Planning Committee. I know we have some people in attendance who have been at this for years, and I really want to appreciate say how much I appreciate it from the board to all the volunteer hours that you put in. It's been really quite amazing. So thank you, everyone. And the work's not done, so thank you.
Thank you.
You're right.
Okay, next up we have a discussion around forming ad hoc committees for our equity work and for our to review school start time and calendar. So in discussions around those two topics specifically, the first was really the idea that the start time and calendars needs a lot of community input, it needs a lot of research, it needs a lot of study, and that we really as a board feel like an ad hoc committee would be a great way to go about that. And then in regards to the anti-racism work, again, the same principle. This is something that's going to require a lot of input, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of information and study, and it's important that we have representation on these committees of various people throughout the community and the district. So that's how this conversation started. Does anybody have anything to add?
I'm excited to see us move forward. I think the whole concept of using ad hoc committees is kind of an untapped resource for us that we haven't used in the past. So I think it's going to be helpful, these two immediately, but long-term as a way for us to get more and more community involvement. You know, I'm personally interested in both committees. You know, I'd like to volunteer to be on the committee to look at schools start times and calendar, particularly because that's one that's been on our agenda for a long time to get moving forward. And one thing I've said is we've talked about these committees. One of the first things we should do when we split up into these committees is have each one develop some sort of a charter so that its purpose, its timeline, its expected product is going to be real clear to everybody.
Brandy, I'd like to understand the makeup of the committee.
Sure. So we've got a policy around this, policy BCE. It states the chair of the board or the board shall establish ad hoc committees as needed. Once an ad hoc committee is established, the chair shall appoint 2 or 3 board members to serve on the committee. An ad hoc committee may select its chair. So it's a relatively brief and open policy statement, but I think Bob is right that I think once the committees, if we as a board decide that we want to form these 2 committees, once the committees are formed, really stating out what the charter is, what the timeline is, and sort of what the scope of work is will be really important. And then also regular reporting back to the board, right? So that we can all understand. And I think having 2 to 3 members on each committee will also help with that form of communication. I think with these 2 committees specifically, it's going to be really important that they involve parents, that they involve community members, that they involve staff, and then of course the board members. Does that answer your question? Oh, you're still muted, Rebecca.
I hope we include students in both of these committees too.
Good point.
How does the non-board membership of the committee get established?
I think that's what we need to decide. I mean, I think reaching out, we could do sort of an open, district-wide announcement and see. I've already had some people volunteer via email saying, hey, I just want to be on one of these committees. I feel passionate about both. I think it's going to be important to reach out to some stakeholders within the community and also recognize that at this specific time, a lot of people are very busy. I mean, there's so much uncertainty and so much that we're asking of parents right now and of staff and everybody. And so, being aware of that as well. And I think we should also talk about potentially how many people we'd like on these committees. And I wasn't a part of organizing the long range facilities committee because I believe that was done by district staff a couple of years ago. But if we could sort of follow that model, I think that could be great too.
Yeah, Ron, I agree with that's an important question. Who's going to be on that? How big is it going to be? And I would see that as part of that charter process. Once we assign board members, they would get together and kind of talk about what's a realistic and the most effective makeup of their ad hoc committee that they're working with.
So your proposal then, Bob, would be that the committees themselves would define size and who gets appointed and how?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Do we want to have them just move forward on their own, or do we want to require them to come back to the full board to approve the charter that they create before moving forward with, you know, however many community members and such?
Yeah, my first reaction is that the board should be the ones that approve the plan for the committee.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's all I have on that right now.
Yeah, so I would see the committee members that get assigned come up with a charter, including membership profile, and then bring that back to the full board for approval before moving forward.
I think it's a great idea, Bob. And I think also starting with that core, you know, 2 or 3 board members, preferably 3, I think, being able to communicate to the committee as they're forming, you know, it's important to the board to have an equal representation of X, Y, and Z.
So my understanding is as board committees, these would be public meetings under the same rules as our standing committees or the board itself, essentially. So when we get together, those groups can't get together informally. They have to get together with notice to the public. Even the 3-person group would have to, which is fine. It's a lot of trouble for Greg, but I don't know if anybody else suffers. So that's a joke. Sorry, Greg. So just as long as we know that that's the process, yeah.
I trust that you're not really that cavalier about Greg's suffering, but
not that cavalier, no.
I had a point in that in my joke. I forgot it, so I'll come back to it.
Yeah, but you're right, Ron. They would be public meetings and would have to be held in public and recorded or minutes taken.
That was my point, and it speaks to our regular board meetings as well. I know Greg had sent out to the board, but I don't know how, if we've published it or announced it wider, that all these Zoom meetings are now available on the district website. If you go to the school board section, if you go to the minutes, there's also a link to the recording of all but one of our Zoom meetings that we've had since going to this format.
Yes, good reminder.
As we're thinking as board members about the participation in these committees, there's also the PAC out there that's got to be formed. And I think we'll generally have board members on the PAC. So we have 3 big lifts for board members in terms of extra committee work. Probably this means somebody's going to be on 2 of those. I don't think anybody should probably volunteer for all 3. But, you know, you might end up on one of them almost for sure, right? Unless you really protest. So.
That's a good point. Are there any questions around this, or people feeling like, you know, questions around if this is the direction we want to take?
I mean, in order for the work to get done and action to happen, I think these ad hoc committees are a must, because our meeting twice a month is not enough to get all of the work that we need to do. So I think that we need to move forward on this personally.
Okay, well then I think it's, you know, I think it's pretty unanimous that this is from the board wanting to move forward with forming these 2 committees. The next question to me, or to you all, would be, Bob's already said he would like to be on the start time committee, but what other committees are people willing to step up for at this point? Got to get the ball rolling.
And I think to Ron's point, you know, we can't require it, but I would imagine that, I mean, certainly I'll be involved in the PAC, and we'll all be involved to, you know, greater or lesser extent. So on the bond side of things, that's going to be a board-wide effort.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm very passionate about both the start times and, you know, making sure that our school district is anti-racist, and the bond, of course. So I wouldn't mind being on either of them or multiple of them. wherever you see that you need me. My passion lies in all three areas.
Great. Rebecca, do you have a preference?
You're
Oh,
muted, Rebecca.
Thank you guys for watching me. I have the same preference. I'm passionate about all three, so I'm willing to, and I have the time to do all three.
Okay. Brian, do you have a preference?
I do not have a preference.
Okay. Ron?
All three of them are attractive, but I don't, at this point, I'm probably available for two of them. So I'm supposed to be looking for work, and I kind of am. And there's one remote possibility out there that if I took it would probably limit me to one of the committees at this point. So I don't know, but if that's not there, then I'd like to serve on two of them where you would see fit. I will say this, and this is, I don't know how people are going to feel about it. I think on most of these committees, well, certainly on the bond committee, haven't sensed that anybody's really against the bond, even though we didn't get a universal approval of this. But I think there's both proponents and people who are cautious about the time change. And we have on record that we have people cautious about at least some aspect of the anti-racism group. I would encourage, it's your decision, Chair, but I would encourage you to consider putting on the committee one board member at least who's not in the majority view of the committee. I say this as a challenge because I know it's a challenge because we're worried that the committees need to be productive. I think from the point of view of the community and also from the point of view of the quality of the deliberations on the committee, it may be better if there's a broader perspective. And I have been involved in groups that deliberately included dissenters in the group, and most of the time, not all the time, I have to say, most of the time, it turned into a really rich experience and a very productive one. And so that would be my suggestion. I'm not in a position to require it, and the rest of the board might disagree with me, but that would be my guidance. And
I'm going to challenge you on that.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's always the most productive or rich experience, just given even the experience on this board.
Yeah.
But I would accept your challenge to have differing opinions.
And the board could always sentence me to have to be on one of those committees if it was my idea.
Yeah.
And I think that would be justice.
Well, and I think too, all the committees will be held in public, and just like with the Bond Development Committee, encouraging members of the board who aren't even on these committees to still attend when available, because it is always useful information to observe, even if you're not a member of the committee. Yeah.
So this might be an omen, but as I was speaking, a skunk apparently did its business outside my house. So I have skunk smell flowing in my window here.
That's fine.
Check the dogs.
Okay, well, it's good timing because also on our agenda for our next meeting will be the standing committee assignments of board members too, so we can kind of do this all together, or I can do it all together. So, Bob, I want to ask you a question in regards to your idea about, the initial board members forming the committee will be sort of the ones charting it. Do you envision as a board tonight us setting down some boundaries around those charters, or do you envision these being done within the committees?
Because we've not used this sort of thing very much, and when we did, there's kind of been an external structure to it. Like with the Long Range Facilities Committee, there was a state structure to how those, that's a required thing that you have to have. This isn't something that we've really done as a board. In the past several years, one of the big things that we've shifted in our work as a board is involving the public more, seeking public input more. And this is a growth area that I'm really glad to see us do, which is a long way of saying we don't have a track record. There isn't a typical way of doing this. So I think it might be most effective if we kind of break up into those initial committees, brainstorm some ideas and bring it back to the board as to how they'll be structured, rather than trying to, unless, I mean, and I'm not trying to shut down if somebody has a strong structural vision right now, bring that out. But I think we could spend a lot of time going around tonight that could be better, more efficiently done in a smaller group.
Mm-hmm. Is anybody passionate about the structure of the sort of charter of the committee tonight? Okay, I'm seeing head nods as no. Okay. Bob, I think you bring up some good points, and I feel comfortable following that suggestion. All right, any other questions or discussion points around the formation of these ad hoc committees? All right, go ahead, Rebecca.
Brandy, have we, what is the next step for us on the bond for the bond?
So Joe can lead that a little bit, but basically we have somebody who has stepped up to be the head of the PAC, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So we've had somebody step up, and then we have somebody else who's now stepping up. So yes. So back to their one, but we're finalizing those details. But yes, we'll have somebody in charge of the PAC. We also have Lydia Kyler, who will be working as part of the PAC as well. So yeah, we'll be spinning up that and getting through the next step. So that's a large part of it. And then we'll be actually the first step is we have to get these things filed. So we get them filed with the state office, and then we'll be working with Jeremy to understand our next steps, Jeremy Wright, and Karina, if we have any other things we need to get onto for the next thing before we start a campaign. Before the PAC starts a campaign. The district won't be starting a campaign, but we'll be providing information.
And what is our responsibility as school board members?
Your responsibility is that's yeah, we're sort of virtually knocking on doors. That's the other part of it. So you know, there'll be lots of opportunities for you to be involved in talking about it, answering questions. There are always lots of questions about what the details are of what, you know, what the dollars would go for, what the structure of a bond oversight committee is, and talking to people about getting out to vote. That's an important part of it. So.
Okay.
Like, I think it's going to be a bit like the labor leading up to childbirth. Like, you're going to know what's happening. We're not going to sit through it. Like, we're going to know the work that needs to be done when we need to know it. So I have full faith that the PAC and the district will fully communicate it with us as a board when there's times that we can support and times we need to do the work. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Good questions. So agenda for next meeting, we have our next meeting is August 25th. We will review our monthly financial reports, nominations for the OSBA Board of Directors for Yamhill Polk County, designate our board committees. Those are the standing committees of the board. Discuss superintendent and board working agreement, discuss our board evaluation process, discuss code of conduct revisions, and finalize the board goals. All of that is, of course, subject to change, but that's a lot on the business meeting, and hopefully we'll get to it. So, all right, if that's it, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Wait, Rebecca's trying to say something. You're muted. There you go.
Do you want us to submit what committees we want to be on?
Yes, please. Sorry. Thank you for bringing it up. I would love to hear from board members as to which committees you'd like to serve on this coming year. And also, I emailed all board members today in regard with a few questions with the board goals. So if you could answer that email as well, that would be really helpful.
Also, what about the schools? I know we're not able to visit the schools, but if we're going to be assigned a new school.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think bigger question around that is what do we want that to look like? What do we want that to look like this year as board members in our outreach and connection with individual schools? Yeah, so think about that, everyone. And please, if you have ideas around that, include them in the email regarding the goals and also the committees. Yeah.
Joe, do you think it would be technologically feasible to allow board members to sit on some classes?
Probably not. due to the student privacy concern. So probably not. I don't know. I can certainly check with our attorneys, but I'm fairly sure that we probably wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay. Keep thinking outside the box, though.
Yeah, I'll ask because that could be something interesting.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Adjourn us at 9:30 exactly. Look at that. Congratulations to all of us. All right. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.